This is a real scene taken by netizens. There is a strange mirror hanging on the column of a hospital hall, and it is said that this mirror is facing the hospital's emergency room. Does this have any special effect? This incident happened in 2008. At that time, I was just in the 5th grade. Because my mother worked in the hospital, I usually went to the hospital after school, waited for my mother to get off work, and then went home together. I remember it was one night in May. At that time, I was doing my homework in my mother's office when a nurse suddenly ran in and said that an emergency patient needed my mother to deal with it. My mother told me to do my homework well and not to run around, so she hurried out with the nurse. Until I finished my homework, my mother didn't come back yet. Because it was too boring, I sneaked out of the office and wandered around the hospital alone. It was already 9 o'clock in the evening. Although the first hospital is not as crowded during the day, there are still many nurses and doctors busy walking in the corridor. I suddenly found a large pool of blood stains on the floor of the corridor, as if there was a bleeding man all over. I just passed by here, and looking at the amount of bleeding on the ground, I'm afraid that man is already more ferocious. At that time, I walked along the blood to the end of the corridor with fear and curiosity. I saw a man in brown standing motionless in the corner, as if the man dripping from him lowered his head and standing with his back to me, and his body trembled slightly, as if it was in pain. I thought he was seriously injured and couldn't find a doctor, so I stepped forward to see if he could help, and the man seemed to hear my footsteps and slowly turned his head in a very strange posture. When I saw this man's face, my brain exploded in an instant. This was by no means a living face. Half of his right skull was broken, half of his flesh and blood were blurred, and his stomach was cut open, and he was constantly bleeding down. The man took something flowing from his stomach and approached towards me step by step, and his mouth kept moving towards him. I shouted to save me. My body hurt so much. At that time, I turned around and wanted to run, but this horrible scene scared my legs a little weak. As a result, I sat on the ground and couldn't climb. The man howled closer and closer to me. When I was about to catch me, I finally summoned up my courage and got up from the ground, screaming towards the corridor. I ran to the other end. As I ran, I kept looking back. The man was not going to let go. I had been following me tightly behind. After watching the back and running for a few steps, I suddenly bumped into the man in front of me and looked up. Unexpectedly, it was my mother who returned to the office and didn't see that I was looking for me in the hospital. I hurriedly showed him the horrible dressing room behind me, but when I looked back at the corridor, there was nothing blood, let alone a man covered with blood. My mother looked at me with a shocked face and didn't say anything to blame. She just kept admonishing me not to run around in the hospital in the future, especially at night. I looked back at the neat corridor and couldn't believe that what I had just seen was hallucinations. After returning to the office, my mother and I packed up and were ready to go home. But at this time, there was a sudden burst of rapid footsteps and shouts in the corridor behind him. It turned out that several medical staff pushed an emergency patient and were running to the operating room. We hurried against the wall and made way out. When the patient passed by me, I was so scared that I was stunned on the spot. Because the man lying in the hospital bed is the man covered with blood that I saw in the corridor just now, and I won't be mistaken about the injuries and appearance of that person's head. Since he was just sent by an ambulance, what did I see in the corridor just now? I dare not think about it any further. Later, I heard from the nurse that the man had a car accident and was too seriously injured to be rescued. And because of this strange experience, I no longer dare to run around, especially in hospitals at night. Welcome to subscribe and like it.